Good morning and welcome to our 36th Coffee with the Commissioner event. Obviously, we're used to doing these out in the community where we could sit around a table and talk, look each other in the eye, talk about issues, roads, infrastructure, bridges, all the issues that were very important to us. But of course, in this day and age with the pandemic, we can't do that anymore. And it's sad in many ways, but technology allows us to reach out and speak to a lot of people at once and really have more of a wide audience as well as we're streaming this on Facebook. So here we are at the 36th Coffee. We've got our special guest this morning, Mr. Mark Faulkner. He's the CEO of Baptist Healthcare in Pensacola. We also have Janice Gilley, Escambia County Administrator, and then Eric Gilmore, our Emergency Manager. We appreciate everyone being up early this morning. Lots to talk about. Lots happened this past week, and one of the things that's really kind of blew everyone's mind was, and really kind of off the medical issue, was this Paycheck Protection Plan. I was on a conference call yesterday just to bring people up to date, and a lot of small businesses got boxed out. There was $349 billion allocated for small businesses, and unfortunately, a lot of the banks couldn't get it done. So the good news is I believe Congress authorized more money, so the small businesses will be able to get their loans. I know locally several folks applied early, and depending upon which bank they banked with, it determined whether or not they got the money. I know that several banks did a very good job of getting the applications done. Other banks maybe not so much. One of the things we talked about yesterday in our conference call with Florida West and the promotion and the PEDC meeting was, and I hope that this happens because this is going to be brought up to the Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to see some metrics behind that. There's a lot of small businesses that I know of that applied for that loan, and they need that money right now. They're struggling just to stay afloat, particularly restaurants, bars, things of that nature, the hospitality industry. What I'd like to see is a list of the banks, the number of loans that they received, and how many of them actually got it across the line and got money for people. So I'm hoping that happens. If so, I'll certainly publish that information because a lot of folks are very angry. They see big corporations, big institutions getting money, and here locally, they applied on time, they did everything right, and they didn't get their money. So that's kind of off the subject, but it's all related to COVID-19. We're living in a weird reality these days. So without further ado, Eric, I'm going to shoot it over to you. There's been a lot going on with the long-term care facilities, the nursing homes. Do you have anything to report, or can you give us an update of kind of where we're at as a county?
I can. So at this time, DOH NACA are monitoring the situation at the long-term care facilities. They're sending teams in to make sure they get a handle on any of the I'm going to say outbreak, but get a handle on what they've got going on at the long-term care facilities. They're trying to slow the spread down by infection control teams in there to make sure certain infection control practices are being done. Here at the county level, the CSA, we're receiving PPE from the state logistical staging area down in South Florida, and we're trying to get that PPE rolled out to those guys. Masks, N95s, which N95s is the hot commodity right now. We're running low on N95s. Procedural masks, we seem to be doing okay on. And isolation gowns seem to be slowly coming in as well. So face shields, gloves, and things of that nature, we get those and get them out as quick as possible. Hand sanitizers. So the teams are in there. They've been in there this week. They've been making contact with these facilities daily. If not, the teams staying in the facilities daily to make sure they can kind of slow the spread. Isolate the people who have been identified with COVID positive, and then segregate them from the non-COVID positive patients. So.
Right on. And another question that I'm going to ask you, in looking at the SITREP yesterday afternoon, you've got all the various different departments, and one of them was military support, and it said not activated. It just was curious for folks who might be looking at that SITREP, is that because that has not been requested, or is it not necessary at this moment, or could you explain what that was?
Yes, sir, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. So it's not necessary at this moment. I don't want to bring our military partners in until they have an actual role in doing something. I don't want them to just be sitting in the EOC twiddling their thumbs. So at this time, we don't have a military liaison in the EOC, and it's usually our Navy base out there. We have a liaison with a Navy base or somebody with that. So there's really no role with them at this point in time. We're still working with FDEM to receive approval to use the old Navy hospital out there for our surge capacity plan. So I'm hoping to hear something this week. I asked them last week, and they had it run up the chain, and I was waiting on the approval back from those guys. So.
Okay, very good. All right, Janice, I'll throw it over to you. Obviously, there was a lot of discussion this week about the long-term care facilities, and we were able to get, I guess the governor's office was able to publish that list, and everyone got it. Anything that you'd like to report? Anything new about the employees? I know that we have a couple of employees now that have tested positive. Obviously, without compromising any privacy, what can you tell folks that might be watching who might be concerned? Because folks interact with our employees frequently.
So first of all, the 2 employees that we've had test positive, both of them were in positions that were not had common communication with the public. The one employee that was out at the small building at the beach, there was another employee in that facility, and that employee has been self-quarantined. In both instances, both employees were in situations where their contact with a positive patient, a positive citizen was in their household. Okay. And so so that's how their contact tracing was handled. The other thing I would share is that both of their offices were heavily sanitized. Okay. The one that the most recent employee, their office has been desanitized twice, just because we want to make sure that everyone knows how serious we are taking this. The first one, it was, the first time they were desanitized, I keep saying desanitized, I mean sanitized, disinfected is what I meant, right. Was a week ago. And that's how long it's been since that second employee has even been in the office. So I feel very confident that our facility staff and then also our directors are taking direct action as soon as they know that there could even be a possibility. I would also mention that the first employee, anyone that came in contact with that facility, we were still making sure that we were taking the test, the temperatures of any employee that was coming in contact with that facility. So I feel confident that we've taken all the measures that we needed to protect anyone that may have come in contact with either of those employees.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think as we continue to move forward with testing, whether it's somebody that's been in contact or somebody that is having symptoms, I think we're going to continue to see more people potentially test positive. But I think that everyone has been very alert, and I think that the public information campaigns about what to do as soon as you think you've come in contact with someone, or as soon as you feel like you're having symptoms, has been really, really helpful. So we're catching these on the early end of any potential contamination of other areas.
And I believe we have about 37 employees, is that right, that are out on some form of the long-term Family Medical Leave Act, or, yeah.
Yes, sir. We have about 37 as of yesterday. Those were the numbers that we had of those that are on the extended leave, taking advantage of that opportunity. And we're very thankful that we're able to help our employees do that. And then we have about 47 that are working remotely. Mm-hmm. That number may grow or it may lessen, just depending on how long the governor's stay-at-home order continues.
And now I work out at the base as a contractor employee out at NAS Pensacola, and the DOD has issued guidance that if you're anywhere on that base where you can't maintain 6 feet of social distancing, you have to wear the masks. The county, we haven't met in a while. We're under emergency declarations, which give you some plenary powers in our absence. But have you done anything like that? Have you mandated any kind of mandatory face coverings for the employees?
I've not mandated it. When we talk to the directors, what we've done is we've asked them to, be very considerate and make sure that if they need any type of PPE for their employees, to make sure that we are providing that. Eric can speak to our supplies. I mean, he and I have been trying to make sure that we monitor those supplies, and we are making sure that we're doing our best to ensure that we have enough supplies for anyone that has requested them through our directors and other staff. And so, Eric, I don't know if you want to mention that, because that is something that we do talk about frequently.
Yeah, we do talk about that.
Eric, I cut you off. I'm sorry. You were saying about PPE?
So I do have some PPE for employees here. We do have the directors at Westlaw have asked for PPE for employees. As I said, procedural masks, we have those. So I've been getting those out to the directors as requested. But we are monitoring the situation, and we do have a small cash here for the county to give what we need from the employees.
Okay, very good. Mark, without further ado, good morning, Mr. Faulkner. Thank you so much for being here. We really enjoyed your last visit, got a lot of great information, and I know it's been a couple of weeks since you've been here. So first, thanks for being here, and then would you like to start out by giving us an update about Baptist Healthcare in Pensacola?
Sure, and thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join you this morning. So I'll start by adding on to some of the comments that have already been made. First, I'll start with the sort of the economics. You mentioned some of the federal support that has been pushed through Congress and signed by President Trump. And so there are many facets of that. In the small business you talked about a little bit, there's a healthcare component of that as well. There aren't many sectors. In fact, there's probably a short list of sectors that are doing okay economically, and healthcare is not exempt from that. We're certainly seeing that and feeling that as well, in large part because of the expenses associated with responding to the pandemic, and then the volumes as we have all collectively suspended, postponed elective care, and really depleted and diminished our census and our volumes to prepare for the capacity that might be demanded. So at any rate, we're all sort of watching what's happening in Washington and what's happening in Tallahassee. And so I applaud your support for small businesses, restaurants, and the like. I know that the policies that we collectively have advocated for are very damaging economically.
Yes.
To a lot of sectors, and we are very sensitive to that and very concerned about that. We know there's a balance of protecting the public health and safety as well as protecting the economic vitality and viability of our community. And I think that what we're seeing now in our community, as opposed to a month ago, it's amazing how much has changed in a month. And what we're seeing here locally, we're seeing a plateauing. We're seeing the beginnings of a downward trend. In fact, if you pull out those institutional settings, whether it's a nursing home or prisons, if you pull out those data and those positives that have tested, we're actually managing, I think, the situation very well as a community. I applaud your efforts and the efforts of the other policymakers early on, seeing what could be happening and getting ahead of that in terms of some of the policies that were implemented. And I think we've gotten traction. And I think the public has largely complied, and I see it, and we all see it, and it's great. So I think we've gotten ahead of it. And what we saw happening in Dade County, in New York, and other places, we've managed to avoid here. Again, there's the exception, and it's the institutional settings that we're managing through. And that's through partnership. Those are very, very difficult situations. And I'll echo what the Secretary of AHCA said the other day. It's very, very difficult to manage spread in those settings. When you've got semi-private rooms, you've got patients with dementia, and you tell them wear a mask and don't stay in your room, and it's just hard to manage. And then think about a prison setting. So at any rate, I think that they're doing the best that they can with the resources they have. And now there have been more resources added, as Eric mentioned. So, again, I think if you carve out that, the community has responded very well. And I think we're working side by side with what the governor's proposing, what's being talked about at the county level and the city level, and that is beginning to loosen some of those constraints.
Right.
And I think there's a right way to do that. I think collectively, I think all the stakeholders should and are speaking to that issue, whether it's tourism and the hoteliers, the restaurants, the whole commerce sector, the healthcare sector, public health, and of course the policymakers, getting to a right pace to move back in that environment. And of course the governor has this task force that's working furiously all week to get recommendations to him by tomorrow. Tomorrow night, so that he can have something on his desk for Friday. And then, so what does that begin to look like when we look at certain activities that have been restricted, like beaches, for example? I think beaches is a relatively low risk setting. Look at kind of, again, where we were a month ago, when we had 4 positive cases in the entire 2-county area, and we had 1 fatality, but we saw what was coming. And many beaches were closing, and it was literally during that county commission meeting when the governor enacted his executive order.
Right, I remember that.
Bay County closed their beaches, Okaloosa closed their beaches, and we moved to be consistent with that.
Well, let me segue real quick, because you hit on a couple of things that I have on my list of questions here to ask. These are compiled from folks that I've spoken with over the last week, some of the questions I've come up with. I had the opportunity yesterday evening to speak with a local who's actually working for a hospital system up in New York. He's been up in Coney Island working, and he's been up there for a month. And he gave me a lot of good things to ask you about specifically. I told him I'd be having this on this morning, and one of the things he asked about was, we know about the ventilators, and here locally, what I've watched as I track this daily is we've sat between 75 and 85% ventilator availability. So our capacity for ventilators has done very well. Hospital beds were between 40 and 50% available, which we never really saw the demand that other areas saw. But he wanted me to ask, in addition to the ventilators, do you have enough staff if you had a surge for all your ventilators to run them? And also the associated medicine, he said, in treating the really critically ill COVID patients up there, they were running low on supplies in terms of medicine. So how is Baptist Hospital fixed for those things?
First of all, those are great questions. So we're doing well. I'll start with ventilators. Obviously, that's the most critical component. If you look at how we're situated, we've got capacity. And I'll speak not only for Baptist, but for the other hospitals as well. In fact, we had a meeting yesterday afternoon late, of the three of us, and we're talking constantly about these types of issues. So we're doing fairly well on ventilators. We're seeing, at least at Baptist, ongoing constraints in critical care. Now, on any given day, we run at 80% occupancy in critical care, 75 to 80% occupancy in acute care setting. And so we diminished that census, but what hadn't really diminished is our critical care. I think today we're running at about 75% occupancy, but only about 25% of those are COVID positive patients.
Are they being segregated? Are they separated from the other critically ill patients?
They are all isolated. All of our COVID positive patients, as well as suspected positive, or what we call PUIs, they're isolated. They're in negative air pressure situations. Our staff are donning and doffing protective equipment. So yes, they are separated. So critical care has always been our issue here because even though we can slow the elective and cancel the elective stuff, heart attacks are still happening, car wrecks are still happening, and the like. So we still have issues regarding ICU capacity. Now, some of his other questions, staffing, yes, we're well staffed in our critical care, our respiratory therapists, our lab, imaging, all those. The team has responded incredibly well. We're in a good position in terms of available staff. The doctors, the intensivists, the hospitalists are all in great shape and doing phenomenal work. Now, the medicines, we're mindful of meds. I think we're in pretty good shape with those. Now, there are some experimental therapies that we've not really pushed yet. There's, of course, the hydroxychloroquine, which a lot of data out there. I think some are starting to see it's actually more harmful than good. Another treatment called remdesivir, which shows a lot of promise. I think that's probably one of the more promising drugs. We've not implemented that yet. To my knowledge, in our community, we haven't at Baptist. There's plasma that we have tried here at Baptist, and I think it's been tried in other hospitals as well. So we're mindful of all those supply issues, not just the PPE, which we are requiring our staff to wear when we're out and about outside our offices, but also the meds that are critical to caring for these patients. These COVID positive patients, there's really not much we do in terms of the antiviral treatment. What we're trying to manage is the patient's immunoresponse.
Right.
This cytokine storm, they call it, where your body just overreacts to the virus, and that is what's harmful in multi-system failure. So we're trying to manage that, but otherwise we're managing the systems and let the body fight it off. We really don't have, as you know, many treatments for these types of situations. So where the patient's on the floor in critical care, we're just sort of managing the symptoms so that the body can push through.
Well, another question that I got, and this one comes from a person who works for the Department of Defense as a pharmacist, extremely intelligent. I've known this individual for many, many years. She was a big advocate for public schools when I was on the school board. But one of the questions that she brought to me and said, you really need to ask this question, is about the antibody testing. Yes. Apparently there was 1 million doses, and they were to be portioned out to Michigan, New York, and Florida. But she says, listen, it's my understanding the closest place to get one here is Panama City. Is that true? And if so, why would the population center of Gulf Breeze, Santa Rosa, and Escambia, we're 500,000 people, why would we send that test to Bay County where there's 175,000 people? I mean, God bless them, but we're bigger. We should have your thoughts on that.
I completely agree. One of the things the task force the governor's looking at is a more equitable distribution of testing capabilities. Right now, the feds and the states are sort of battling over supplies, including meds, including testing, and then the states versus the states are battling, and then even within the state, the hot spots versus people like us in Northwest Florida. So I think we're moving toward a more equitable model of distribution, and I think that should be happening in the next couple of weeks. Now, specific to the antibody testing, I think that has a lot of promise, personally. The body, when it first reacts to the virus, in 7 to 10 days, we create what's called IgG. It's the initial flow of antiviral response, and then we create IgM from days 10 to 20. It actually peaks at day 49. And so this testing is serological testing. It looks at whose bodies have been exposed, who have been exposed to this virus, and perhaps built up some level of immunity. It's not proven that the immunity has been built up, but it is certainly suspected. If it acts like any other virus, it's likely to be true. So among us, who has been exposed, built up antibodies to it, might have a level of immunity that we don't even know about.
Right.
And some studies show that for every one tested positive, there could be 10, upwards of 50 people that have actually been exposed to the virus and have built up antibodies. So until we ramp up the antibody testing, we won't know that. Now, there's a lot of issues with the testing itself because these tests aren't always sensitive to COVID-19.
Right.
They're sensitive to coronaviruses, but it may say, yeah, you had a cold back in January, but not necessarily COVID-19. So we're still working through to make sure these tests are accurate before we broadly deploy them.
Let me ask you this question. When do you think the hospitals locally will get back to elective procedures? I know a gentleman who needs a rotator cuff surgery. It was scheduled at Andrews, and they, of course, curtailed that, I believe, to maintain the PPE in accordance with the governor's orders. But when do you think those sorts of surgeries will be ramped up?
I think that's going to happen when the governor lifts his executive order. Right now, that's set to expire May 8th, and I think there are indications that's likely to occur. And so we're preparing as if that's going to be the case. And I, again, had the conversations with Sacred in West Florida yesterday because we're all asking the same questions. We want to move in unison. We want to make sure we're all acting as one when it comes to reopening those elective procedures. Because we know, even though these are elective, some of these are relatively urgent. People are walking around in pain or discomfort or they've got issues we need to tend to. And so I think that could occur the first week of May or the second week of May. And for a while, we're going to be operating in two worlds. We're going to be operating in a world where we have COVID positive patients. We're going to be operating in the old world where we're just taking care of the volume that we thus far postponed over the last month. So we're trying to figure out how to do that to protect the safety of our staff and our patients while also opening back up to those elective procedures. I think we have good plans in place.
And I just want to take a moment for those who are joining us here on the live stream and may not know, this is Administrator Janice Gilley. This is Emergency Manager Eric Gilmore, and then we have Mr. Mark Faulkner, who's speaking with us this morning. He's the president of Baptist Hospital here in Pensacola, and just a wealth of knowledge on all issues COVID. So I want to jump into a couple more questions for you. And one of the questions that's been on everyone's mind, back in late March, I had one of these sessions with Dr. Lanza. And one of the questions I talked about at that time was, and he mentioned it, being out in the sunshine, vitamin D, getting, being out in the open, and how that benefits people. And at that point, our parks were open; they could maintain, they're still open, but our beaches were closed. And I asked him, I said, listen, if it's good to be at a park and a park's fine, why not a beach? And he really said, from a medical standpoint, being at the beach is fine. And so we had that discussion, and I got really, really beat up online about daring to say, hey, let's open it up. And the fear was that if we opened up our beach, we would become the magnet because all the other beaches in the area were closed, and then folks would not be we couldn't count on people to maintain social distancing and do these other things that are necessary to keep this from transmitting. But I know that you were one of the signatories of a letter, and don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to kind of put you on the spot a little bit here. You, Don Rudolph, Gay Nord, and Dr. Lanza signed a letter, really urging us as Board of County Commissioners to close the beaches. Now, we're under intense pressure now to reopen them, as Jacksonville has, Volusia County did a couple of weeks back. I hear Okaloosa County just did. Are you prepared to reverse your position on that?
Yes, we're supportive of that. Let me talk through a little bit about that first letter, and there's a second letter coming.
Oh, is there? Good.
Yes.
All right.
It's over here, and we've signed on that. There's
Wait a minute. Hey, can you show it to us? Can you break some news here? What do you think, Eric? We're going to break some news here.
Hey.
It's all the people watching.
So, there's the Santa Rosa County letter.
Right.
It's going to them today because they're meeting tomorrow on the same issue. And I say that, and it's signed by Doug Sills, Santa Rosa Medical Center, as well as the three here. And then here's your letter here.
Nice.
And what we're saying in the letter is we support reopening. Now, there are conditions to that. I'll take you back to March 19th, the first letter. Again, we had 4 positives in the community. But what we were seeing is outbreaks in Birmingham, outbreaks in New Orleans. Those were identified as hotspots. We had beaches closing. We were one of the only ones still open. The governor had not yet effected his executive order. All that began to happen very rapidly, including the governor having not only self-quarantine requirements from New Jersey and New York and Connecticut, but he added Louisiana, which was a concern for us as we saw what was happening in New Orleans. All those things happened very rapidly on or after our letter, because our concern was we're going to be the only beach that's open.
Right.
Potentially positive patients from outside the community will come here, spread that, and will create all kinds of potential issues in terms of surge in demand and spread in our community. Since then, all those mitigating factors were enacted, and we have seen what we had hoped to see, and that is that flattening and that bending. And remember that the letter we signed asked for 2 weeks. 2 weeks we asked to consider closing the beach for a couple of weeks while we reassess.
Sure.
We were buying time, as we talked about in the meeting, buying time to acquire PPE, buying time to ramp up testing, which was not happening on that date, buying time to understand these treatment remedies that might work, like hydroxychloroquine or like remdesivir and other things. And just sort of getting our legs under us to respond to the pandemic. So we did issue that letter in support of closing beach access as one of other settings where spread could occur. Now we're ready and prepared because we bought time, and we've taken this month and gotten very active in our response as a community and our response as a healthcare organization, that we feel like we're in a better spot to reopen based on some conditions. We certainly don't want to see groups of doing all this nonsense. We want to make sure that's enforceable and all that. But yes, you'll be seeing a letter that will support that reversal.
A couple quick things. I just got a message from my counterpart in Santa Rosa County, Sam Parker, and he's just asked if you could. They're having their meeting. He says, "Can we please get the second letter emailed to us today? Our meeting is tomorrow." So
I let him know that I talked with Dan. Well, Dan, if you're listening to Sam, I talked with Dan Monday. We got the letter approved by the other hospitals yesterday, actually last night, and that was the signed version was emailed to me. So, Sam, this will go to Dan, and Dan will get it to the county commissioners over in Santa Rosa County. So you'll have that in advance of your meeting tomorrow night.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly glad, because I will tell you, for my vote, after having that discussion with Dr. Lanza, knowing from a strictly health perspective, being out in the sunlight with my son fishing at the beach, no problem. It was all that magnet effect of we're going to be the only beach with people coming. Now, the Board of County Commissioners is going to meet on this next Tuesday. I think everyone knows the media's covered it exclusively. And right now we're getting inundated with requests on both sides. I've got people on one extreme that say open it all up, everything, restaurants, and let the chips fall. On the other side of it, you have medically compromised, maybe folks that fall into one of those categories with hypertension or obesity or whatever the case might be, and they're begging us not to open it up. But here's the million-dollar question, and this is the way I've been thinking through it. We were asked to change our way of life. We've cratered our economy as a nation, as a community. It's my understanding about 40% of the people have taken a pay cut or out of work. I mean, we've done devastating damage to our economy, and now oil is crashing, and the ramifications, ripple effects of that, we don't even see that yet, but it's coming. But all of that was done so that we would flatten the curve, so that we wouldn't overwhelm our hospital capacity. And in looking at the numbers, I mean, we had a spike yesterday of 22 cases. Overnight, I don't see any new ones. Are we at that point, Mr. Faulkner? And so what people are thinking now is, okay, is it time we need to ease up because our economy needs to, and we met the goal. The goal was to flatten the curve. The goal was not to overwhelm the hospitals. The fear is that now we're going to move the goalpost and say, well, now we have to keep these restrictions in place. We have to keep this economy closed until there's no virus. I mean, is the goalpost going to keep moving for us until we're bankrupt as a nation and a community? I know it's a loaded question, but what's your thoughts on that? Because you're suffering too. I mean, your revenue's down, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, it's millions of dollars a week at Baptist. I want you to understand that. Millions. Of dollars a week. Millions a week.
Wow.
So, so the short answer is yes. We need to move back to some sense of normalcy. And so the question again is, how do we balance public health and safety as well as economic viability? And both are equally important. Sometimes the cure is more damaging than the disease in this case. So how do we get back to a world where we are doing what we can to protect public safety while moving back to more of an economic viable situation? And so, so when you look at some of the settings that we deal with, whether it's schools or churches or the beach or whatever, there are restaurants, not all social sectors are created the same, and environments are created the same. For example, when you're at the beach, it's a fairly low risk, low contact, low continuous contact, highly, you can change the behaviors pretty rapidly. Whereas in a setting of worship or a school or a prison where you've got different constraints, it's hard to say we can just open everything back up, because I do know we would certainly see a second wave.
Well, I want to let people know, and I appreciate that answer. In looking at some of the other countries that have had different experiences, about 3 weeks back, there was an article in the New York Times, and they were praising Singapore. Now, I traveled to Singapore a couple years ago working on the ST Aerospace deal. Fascinated. I've actually lived overseas in Japan, and that culture, they're very, very compliant, even more so in Singapore. I mean, they have, it's almost like a benevolent dictatorship. I mean, if you will, if you spit on the ground, they cane you, and people can Google what that looks like on YouTube, and it's very ugly. If you bring drugs to that country, they'll kill you. The death penalty. I had to sign something. So they have a society that's very compliant, and they were heralded in this article as the model of, look, this is how you bend the curve. You do this, you do this. Well, they had like 800 cases at that point, and they really had managed it. It was level. It just exploded to 10,000 cases recently. Google Singapore COVID for anyone who's watching doesn't believe it. And what they overlooked, their blind spot was, they're such a wealthy nation, they're just so industrious, but they bring in a huge labor force that does really the hard jobs, the odd jobs, and they put them in very close quarters in barracks, and they did not see that coming, and that's where all their infections are. So now they're running out of room. It's a very small city-state, and I talk about Singapore just because of this. Their service workers, for lack of a better term, is where they're seeing the spike, and it's changing the whole. They had to go and put the lockdown back in, and they had to really firm up the restrictions they had eased, and to a different degree. And tell me if you agree, Eric and Janice and Mark. We have folks in our community who perhaps work in the service business, and like Singapore, they live in close quarters with family members, roommates, and they're in constant contact with the public. That's what I worry about when people that say, well, just open it up. Don't worry about it. Liberty, open it up. I think they have a blind spot if they're not looking at all facets of this. And Singapore really shows us what can happen if we have a blind spot. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know if Eric or Mark want to address that, but what I would say is that I think there is a lot of national coverage right now about the potential for a second wave. And so I do think that we do have to continue to monitor. I think one of the things that Mark and the other hospitals will have to look at is what's the actual predictor of this particular event. people have called for testing, looking at testing numbers within 14 days. But as we've mentioned, from a statistical analysis perspective, when you're testing people that have symptoms or that have come in contact with someone else that's tested positive, are you really getting a good sampling of the public? And so as we've started from day one, testing is the key question. I think hospitalizations and the result of those hospitalizations might be a better bellwether metric to be looking at, because if, let's say, we have 28 cumulative hospitalizations in Escambia County, how many of those have already left and gone home? We know the number that unfortunately have lost their lives. But I think that if you look, I think we need to determine which metric is actually the metric that's going to give us the most data. And so, or the best data. And so when you start looking at potentially second wave, I hope that our healthcare professionals will be able to kind of do the analysis and then help us know which metric makes the most sense to let us know when we're going to be maybe entering into a second phase. Because I'm still concerned about the testing, in the sense that I think the numbers we're getting are specifically related to folks, like I said, that are either displaying symptoms or have come in contact with someone that may have displayed symptoms or already tested positive. Anyway.
No. Well, I wanted you hit something that reminds me. I've asked every week that we've had the hospital professionals on. I've asked this question because Reuters came out 3-4 days ago with an article, very interesting. They tested every member of that ship, the Teddy Roosevelt, 4,800 sailors, and they had around 700 that ended up positive. The startling thing was 60% of them, 60% had no symptoms. So obviously, what that tells you, I mean, if you're reading it, well, obviously someone was spreading it. I mean, 60% of them didn't have the symptoms. So here's the question: what does a person who's asymptomatic look like compared to a person who's had the disease and has recovered? Are they the same? Are they both capable of transmitting the disease? These are the sorts of unknown questions that policymakers like me, I need these answers before we make these tough decisions. What's your thoughts on that, Mark?
So I'll piggyback on Janice and I'll address that. And the first is testing is key. Right now, the state's running about 9 to 10% positive testing. We're doing about 12 to 15,000 tests per day. The studies show we need to do about 150 tests per 100,000 daily to get beyond just mitigating, but to control the pandemic. And we need to get to about a 3 to 5% positive rating. So when we're at that level, when we're seeing only 3 to 5% out of every 100 that we test come back positive, then we're in a containment phase at that point. And that would include not only testing symptomatic and testing people that they've been in close contact, but also testing asymptomatic by random. For example, I know we're going to probably have employers say, look, before my people can come back to work, I need them to be tested. I want to make sure they're clear of this. So to your question, what does an asymptomatic patient look like versus one who's had it and recovered? The answer is they don't look any different.
So, but are they contagious? Are they contagious?
So yes, if you're asymptomatic but positive, you are contagious. If you are recovered, you've got the antibodies, and you're no longer positive, it's likely you're not contagious. So that brings into the point you already made. We need the serological testing for the antibodies, and we need the molecular testing for the active infection. So we're doing 150 tests per 100,000. So for us, it would be about 750 tests per day for our 2-county area. And that's not a stretch. I think we can get there if the supplies become available. We're doing about, 100, 150 a day right now. So we can get there and get ahead and get to a 3 to 5% positive rate. So we've got containment of the active spread. Then there's the question of, all right, who's already had it and built up immunity, and they're free to go about the country, so to speak. And so I think those are very important points we've got to get to rapidly. We've got to expand capacity. As the state, we're going, like I said, we're doing about 12 to 15,000 tests per day. We need to be about 40 to 60,000 tests per day to be at that containment level. So we got about 3 or 4 times more testing per day, not only in the state, but also locally, to be at that level of containment. containment.
Let me ask you all a question. I just got a question from Sam here on the call. He wants to know if you all believe that limiting the hours that the beaches are open makes sense. I know they're going to be voting on that tomorrow. You say no.
I say no. Here's why. People are going to concentrate in those limited hours. If you're open from 6 to 9 and from 5 to 8 in the evening, guess when people are going to go? There. If you're open, sunrise to sunset, I think you'll see a less tendency for people to consolidate and congregate. I think you'll see people in the mornings and whatever. I think we're only creating a setting where it actually creates a concentration of people that are likely to congregate. That's my opinion.
Interesting. Well, one of the things I said, and I believe I said it last week on the call, was, for my vote, I'm moving very cautiously. Back late March, in my discussions with Dr. Lanza, after I heard medically there was no difference between being at the beach and being at a park, that I favored opening the beaches because there's 26 miles of beaches, and but since then a lot's happened. Obviously, we're now at 340 cases, 10 deaths, and a lot of problems in nursing homes and other things like that. But I think going forward, and let me know what you all think about this, I really think it has to be done in phases and stages if we decide to do it. And obviously I'm just one vote of the 5, but and I think it can't be wide open, like you had said, Mark, right away, because then it's going to be a madhouse. And I think we have to do it in coordination with the medical professionals. It sounds like that box is about to be checked when we get that letter. And by the way, when you send that to Sam, would you send a copy to me too? I'd love to put that on my blog for people to read, if you don't mind, ahead of the meeting. And so it sounds like we got that box checked. The medical professionals, you and the others, it sounds like you're going to sign. By the way, will there be the same 4 signatories on that letter that you're sending?
No, there'll be the 3 hospitals here in Escambia, and there'll be the 4 hospitals, the 3 of us and Santa Rosa for the Santa Rosa letter. We've not asked, nor have we heard from Dr. Lanza regarding that, because I know it felt like he was put in a very difficult position back in late March. So we just felt like it would probably be easiest and best to exempt him from even being asked to sign or not sign. He's already expressed how he feels, and I agree. From a clinical standpoint, I think being outdoors is good. Obviously, it decreases concentration of people indoors, and I think it's healthy for us to be outside. I can't wait to get back to the beach myself.
Well, and so that's great. So we've got that box checked. Me too. Believe me, the Pompano are running. I love to go fishing, and it's been and from the beach, there's nothing like it. To me, it's very relaxing. And so we got the medical professionals. We got that box checked. I think we'll come up with a phasing and a staging plan. I believe the board will, in coordination with Janice and Eric, will come up with a plan that's reasonable, makes sense. But the third component to me is very important, and that's enforcement. I mean, if we're going to do this, and then suddenly we have a block party erupt like we had last week, it was very, very ugly, and it was allowed to just continue till it died. No matter what anyone tells me, that's what happened. I just don't think that's tenable. I mean, because a lot of people have made a lot of sacrifices to get us where we're at. We're bending the curve here in Pensacola, Escambia County, and in Florida. And so if we ease it up, and some people cannot control themselves and maintain, the social distancing or, groups of less than 10, we have to have enforcement. So I don't know what that looks like. And I know it's much easier to keep something closed, to guard something that's closed, than it is to patrol something that's open with restrictions. And I know it puts law enforcement in a tremendously difficult position. I know Pensacola Police Department, they were stuck with that tough situation there, and they have a lot of different forces which led to the way they handled that. But if we see that at the beach, the one thing I'm going to, for my vote, we have to have a mechanism to claw it back. We have to have a stick, a carrot and a stick. And I hate to talk about that when we talk about beach access, but I see what's happening in Singapore. I see what happens in these other places when things get loose. And then, the people that love liberty and, they want to bang the Constitution on the table, they're nowhere to be found when the hospitals fill up and people are dying, right? So we have to be careful as the deciders. So enforcement, buy-in from the hospitals, and a staged plan. That's what I'm looking for. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is going to be a fluid situation for at least a year. Until we have a vaccine, we're going to be needing to all collectively communicate and monitor, as Janice has already pointed out, Eric's pointed out, in terms of the data. And as we dial things up, we have to have the ability to dial things back as we see numbers. And hospitalizations is one of those key metrics. If we start seeing, again, as we open back up to electives and the like, our beds are going to fill back up.
Yes, they are.
And our COVID capacity is what it is, and our volumes are what they are. And if we start seeing this bump up, we'll have to do this, we'll have to do this, we'll have to do a lot of things to dial this up and down based on public policy and based on what we do in terms of elective cases and the like. And so I completely agree. It is easier to restrict than it is to monitor. And I think, again, coming back to who I think we are as people of Northwest Florida, I think we enjoy our freedoms.
Yes.
As I've talked about earlier, we have seen a bending of the curve outside of the institutional settings. We've seen the community's response, and it's been wonderful.
It has been.
And I think yes, and I think the vast majority of the citizens are incredibly compliant and respectful, and they understand that with freedoms come accountability, and with liberty come responsibility.
Yes.
It's been said that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast should be bookended by the Statute of Responsibility on the West Coast. And I think as a community, we have to recognize that, look, we're going to lift constraints. We're going to open up those freedoms once again, but they come with responsibilities. And to self-police and self-monitor our behavior so that we don't have the situations where we see that invites the spread of this disease, whether it's groups and all the stuff that we've seen sporadically. And I don't think we let there's the 20-60-20 rule. 20% will say, sign me up, I'm there. 20% will say, go away, leave me alone. 60%, we got to make sure to understand the importance and they're compliant. We can't manage and we can't dictate based on the behaviors of a few.
Yeah, amen.
Mindful of the freedoms of all.
Amen.
And so there's enforcement and there's the self-policing aspect.
Well, and again, yeah, because there are folks that will tell you, they'll look you in the eye and tell you, this is no different than the flu. It's been ramped up by the media. They're out to get President Trump. All these things, maybe there's some truth to that, maybe there isn't. But I know I take this very seriously. And that's why I'm constantly reading as much as I can, meeting with folks like you, folks that know, because there's a lot of armchair experts that say, well, just open it up. It's liberty, the Constitution, freedom, open it up. When their grandma or their daddy dies, I think they maybe have a different perspective. So we have to, as policymakers, we have to be very, very mindful. We can't do the knee jerk. And it's tough because I'm going to be decisive. I always have been, haven't dodged a vote ever. Closing school. This reminds me of closing Woodham High School, the first vote I made on the school board in 2006. I still get people that see me that are mad about that. One of the toughest decisions I ever made, especially Woodham graduates. But back to what's important, guys. Next Tuesday, the board, in all likelihood, is gonna, it's gonna be a difficult conversation. But hearing what I'm hearing from you today about the letter, Mark, we're more than likely going to do something. I mean, people are going nuts. Child abuse is going up. Domestic violence is going up. We heard that from the sheriff the other morning on the radio. But Janice, this is going to be a tough question for you. If the board gives you direction, strict phased opening with restrictions, how are we going to enforce it? Are the lifeguards the code enforcement? I mean, my worry is if we have a block party out at the beach and the lifeguard comes up and says, "Hey, fellas, we can't have a party like this." I'm afraid not only will they be told, "Get out of here," they might even get beat up. So what are we going to do? How are we going to enforce this if the board says, yes, let's open it up?
So, that we do have officers that are stationed on the beach, police, sheriff's deputies that are on the beach. And I know that the Island Authority and the county we work closely with them. And so what I would say is that we would obviously have a plan with the sheriff, and their support would be up to support our lifeguards and our code enforcement and anyone else that we need to send out there to help monitor. We have given employees different assignments. And so I think there's a way that we can provide a public information campaign. Santa Rosa Island Authority has done a really good job in the past of public information campaigns like don't leave your tents on the beach overnight, those kind of things. So I think that we can have a crew of people that will go out there and try and help monitor. I don't think this is going to be one individual group. I mean, I think, as Mark has said, our community has responded really well to the things that we have asked of them. And I think this will will be another example.
Oh, I don't disagree. And Janice, I don't disagree at all. And like Mark said earlier, the 60-20-60 rule, 20-60-20, it's like the 90-10 rule. 95% of people will comply. They'll be grateful that we've done this. They'll even wear masks if we tell them to. And they'll just be happy to be out at the beach. I know I would. But it's always the few that ruin it for the many. We saw that with the vote we had to make on the open containers at the boardwalk. It was a few that were going to ruin it. Luckily, we got that one right and fixed that one the way we should. But again, so you talk about lifeguards out there, code enforcement, but have you talked to the sheriff's office? Will the sheriff help us enforce this if we open it up? Because I've heard different things on media. I haven't heard directly. Have you spoken directly to the sheriff about that?
I did speak to him last week, and I think his sage advice was that we should not put him in a position of having to arrest a lot of citizens, and I agree.
I don't want
to.
I don't want to do that. I don't want that optic.
Right. So that's why I think we're going to have to be very specific about what our requirements are and what we're going to ask individuals to do.
Hey.
So this is the thing. He obviously, as the law enforcement official, has the responsibility to enforce anything that is either statutory or an ordinance or a requirement of the commission to enforce. But I want to be a good partner with him.
Yes.
As I know the commission does, and we don't want to put him in a position of like I said, arresting a lot of citizens. So what we want to do is we want to come together and make sure that we have the right way to handle this in terms of public information, but which would require public compliance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I've heard
that we don't have folks that are wanting to tempt us on that, because I think that, as you said, with the clawback, I do think that would be a consequence to everyone.
Bingo. Yep.
Yeah. So, I just have a lot of faith in this community. And I did want to mention something else, too. The community has been amazing in terms of their support.
They have.
Our employees, the city employees, our first responders. We had our EMS got an entire box of Tyvek suits from Home Depot the other day, and we're working on making sure that we properly recognize them. And then previously we got some donations from Lowe's, and then we have folks that Eric can tell you about, that have provided cloth face masks. So our community is amazing, and I think our community will continue to respond because I think they also want to be back out at the beach.
Yes.
And I don't think they want that taken away from them. So, and I think your point too about young people taking it home to their grandparents or their parents, or maybe someone else that has immuno issues in their family is key. And so I think that's also part of the public information campaign that the hospitals and the healthcare providers and Department of Health can help us with, because sometimes people don't think of it is a bit selfish, right? You go, you get exposed, and then you go hug grandma thinking, oh yeah, I'm just hugging grandma, right? Or anyway, we just need to make sure that we continue to beat the drum on how you can potentially pass this along to someone that you love, that you really didn't mean to pass it along to. And so that your consequences do have, your behaviors do have consequences that you maybe had not thought of before. So.
Well, that leads me to a great other thing. I've heard a lot of folks have reached out and said, hey, we really don't want you to open the beach, but if you do, and Pam has just hit me with a question, please limit the beach to residents of the county first and see what happens. The only problem with that is, who's going to enforce that? Are we going to do checkpoints? Where's your papers? I mean, is that what I just don't see that happening. And they say, well, check the license tags. No, that doesn't work either, because we have a lot of active duty military that have license plates from all over the country, but they're legitimate residents. So I just don't see that as a possibility. And one of the worries that I've had, and you guys tell me if you think I'm way off base here, if you open it up, you pretty much got to make friends with the idea that you're opening it up, and people are going to not necessarily follow the rules. So for my vote, it's definitely got to have a clawback. That way you get compliance from the hoteliers, their staffs, other citizens. It's social pressure to not mess it up so that we pull it back again. But I don't know that limiting it to just Escambia residents, because I don't think we're going to have checkpoints that are going to check that. I just don't see that happening. I mean, do you, Janice? Is there any way we could do that?
Well, so for example, Santa Rosa County has been successful at doing that because they have the Navarre Bridge, right? So they're able to do that because Dan Brown shut down, Gulf Islands National Seashore.
Right.
So
They got one way in, right? Essentially.
Yes, sir. They're in a unique in a position. Think about Perdido Key. Perdido Key attaches to Alabama.
Exactly.
So there's no way, I don't think, to shut down that. We are monitoring all of the beaches from Mississippi all the way, along the Gulf Coast to make sure that we are all doing things similarly in terms of opening similar times and things like that. So I believe Orange Beach, Baldwin County, those groups are also meeting this week. And then I know Destin City Council, and there was another city that's meeting. So I think that we on the Gulf here are trying. The point is this: there won't be just one place for everyone to congregate.
Right.
It's not just Escambia's opening, just Baldwin County's
Correct.
opening. I think a lot of us are looking at the May 1st deadline, the May 1st date, because that is after the Save Our Homes, executive order potentially could expire next week.
Well, Pam is following up on her question. Says there's a bridge to Pensacola Beach too. Use that as a checkpoint. And Pam, I agree. Okay, we could do that, but here's the problem: a lot of folks come here and they stay in our hotels, and our hotels make money by filling their hotels with people from all over the place. So if we start to lessen the restrictions, and someone drives here from Mobile to stay a weekend at Pensacola Beach, are we really going to stop them at the bridge and say, you're from Alabama, you can't come to Pensacola? I mean, it's not workable, because then you're telling the hoteliers you're stuck, and they're not going to fill their hotels with residents like me. I'm going to drive there and I'm going to drive home, right? So there's all these complications. Knee-jerk solutions don't work, right? I mean, we got to make friends with that. We can't do knee-jerk solutions. It can't be, absolutes. You got to do this, or you just don't care about us. And I care about everyone. I know that everyone on this call cares about everyone. I know that my peers on the Board of County Commissioners care about everyone. I know Mr. Faulkner cares about everyone. I mean, if we don't do it right, his hospital gets overrun, and we don't want that. Nobody wants it. But that's going to be an interesting discussion. I don't think there's any way we limit it to just Escambia residents, because number one, we don't have the manpower to check it. I don't believe the sheriff's going to put vehicles out there checking. In fact, I think he's out doing checkpoints at the highway, isn't he, Janice? You can just give me a head nod. I believe they have their units out there. But they're not turning people away there either. They're just saying, hello, where are you from? Have a nice day. Quarantine for 14 days. I don't even know if they're getting their information. So a lot of folks don't necessarily see the value in that. I'm not trying to sound cynical, but if everything's on the honor system, we know how that works, right? Okay, a couple quick questions because we're running out of time. And again, I appreciate everyone's time being here this morning. Mark Faulkner, CEO of Baptist Healthcare. Eric Gilmore, we appreciate everything you guys are doing. The SITREP is fantastic. By the way, Eric, I shared that SITREP yesterday with several of the military commanders and the Tenant Command COs aboard the base. It's great information. Glad that we're sharing that with the public. Very, very important. And Janice Gilley, of course, thank you for being here early and all the big days you're putting in to keep us all informed. Does the hospital do any contact tracing, Mark? Or is there another entity charged with that? We're hearing a lot of We're hearing a lot of discussion about an army of contact tracers. And, what would you say to the civil libertarians who kind of shudder at that thought?
We are only doing contact tracing for our employees who we suspect are positive, whether it's in the work setting or in the home setting. That's the role of public health. And the analogy I would use is, we take care of the car wreck victim, but we don't do the investigation on what happened. Were they texting and driving? Were they drunk? That's law enforcement. And in this case, we take care of the COVID positive patient. It's public health to figure out where they've been, who they've been in contact with. So clearly one of the things that the governor will likely propose in his reopening is a much more robust contact tracing infrastructure and apparatus, because that's how you contain. Not only do you have to have broad-based testing, but and that's what the folks in the Near East and Far East have done very effectively. They jump on it. They identify a positive, then they get wrapped around that very quickly, and that's how they isolate, and that's how they bend the curve. We've got to get to that level at the state. So we don't do a lot of it. We only do that specific to our employees, but public health does that in both counties.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I guess here's the million-dollar question. And I'll send this around the horn for everyone to weigh in on. Part one, will we ever get back to where we were? And it's kind of a loaded question, maybe an opinion-based question, but, I wonder if we ever will. That's part one. Part two, will we get to a sense of normalcy where we can go to a restaurant or maybe a lounge after work for happy hour? I mean, when do we see that sense of normalcy happening again. Gymnasiums, barbershops. I was contacted by a hairstylist who's out of work. And, people will just want to know, when can they get back to their lives? Mark, we'll start with you and we'll go right around the horn.
Well, the answer is yes. We will get back to a sense of normalcy. And it likely comes when we've got a combination of effective therapies, broad-based testing, and ultimately the vaccine.
How long? How long till that happens?
A year.
A year.
Or more. Yeah. But we'll get back to some relative sense of normalcy before that. When we have confidence that we got treatment regimens that work, we've got better testing of who's positive, who's not. Now, normal will be different when we're back to normal. There'll be people that are working from home now that will probably keep working from home even after this is done. There'll be people that see their doctor now through a computer screen rather than coming to the office. That likely will continue. This has been a catalyst for change, some of which will move back, some of which won't. And so we'll have a new normal, but I do think we get back to quote normal once we have a vaccine in place. And I'll say this too. I think there are elements of normalcy today. We all care about each other. We love our community. We're all pulling in on the same end of the rope here. We want the same thing. We want to get back to normal. We want to protect the public health and safety. We want the economic viability to return. That hadn't changed. And that's what I see as so encouraging. This is not a we, they, as I see it. In fact, when we hang up, Julian Queen's going to call me. We're going to talk more about the beach.
Right.
This is not a we, they. This is a we. This is us trying to make the right decisions for our community. So I think there are elements today that haven't changed. Now, how we interact has and does, but we'll get back to normal. Yes, we will.
Okay. Eric, what's your thoughts on that?
Forget it. I mean, that's exactly right. We will get back to a normal. We will. After a large storm, it's a new normal. It's a different normal, but we will get back to normalcy. How long? Who knows? Some people still have their fears, and some people still take their precautions, but we will get there. Yes, absolutely. I think Mark nailed it exactly. So I totally agree with what Mark said.
What do you think, Janice?
I'm extremely optimistic that it would be in less than a year. Because I'm looking forward to hugging my friends at church, hugging my family. I mean, I do hug my family, but, I really miss that close interaction with people
yes.
That I care about deeply. I also miss my haircut from my hairdresser that I've mentioned before, Mindy,
right.
who I dearly love as a person. And I just feel for her and the fact that, she has not been able to continue her avocation during this. So, I love to go out to very good restaurants, and I have children who have, during college worked in restaurants. So I'm looking forward to that restaurant experience coming back. So, I'm hoping it's sooner rather than later, in the sense of being with other people, having that personal contact with other people, and being able to enjoy the services of a lot of our businesses. That to me is normal. I think the things that Mark mentioned are extremely important, but I think that's what helps you with normalcy is the re-engaging in those things that you are, that are familiar to you, that I feel like we've kind of missed.
Well, I sit here and wonder. I was raised by a guy who said, when you meet a man, you shake his hand, you look him in the eye. Now I feel like, you've got 6 feet away and, wear a mask. I mean, it's just the weirdest thing. I just wonder if we'll ever get back to that. But, before we finish this, I had an interesting comment by Michelle. She says we need smaller classroom sizes. So when we talk about social distancing, I taught 3rd grade for a brief period, and kids are going to do what kids are going to do. And obviously I was on the school board for many years. What do you all think about that? I mean, obviously in Florida, we have class size limits. A lot of states don't, and the teachers appreciate that, and there are some that believe that helps improve education, although I think the data and the science is a little sketchy on that. I think it improves the unions and more teachers. But without getting too deep into that, what do you all think about school, education? Are we going to do more of this distance learning? Is this part of the new normal, Mark? Or are we going to put 10 kids in a class and blow up the budget? How do we do it?
I don't know the answer to that. I think school will be different. I've got a college son, and are they going to come back in the fall? I have no idea. I think it will be different. I think there'll be some ongoing social distancing practices that play themselves out in worship, and in retail, and in schools. I think that's going to stay in place for a while. I think.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I just want to take the moment again to thank Mark. I want, please, on my behalf, please tell all your staff, your doctors, your nurses, all your technicians, the groundskeeper, everyone that keeps that hospital rolling. We owe you guys a debt of gratitude. You take it for granted until you're on your back on a hospital bed. And, collectively as a country, a county, we kind of are on our back financially. So please express the gratitude that the county has for what you all do, and accept my thanks, my heartfelt thanks.
I will do that.
And then Eric and Janice, thanks for everything you guys are doing to keep us going. Appreciate everyone being here. Hey, just to let everyone know, next week my special guest is going to be Congressman Matt Gaetz, and we're as we're transitioning out of the medical portion and more toward rebounding and reopening and getting the economy going, I couldn't think of a better guest to talk about the federal role in helping the economy and communities like Escambia County get back on our feet. So we got to find a way to get him online. He doesn't do Zoom, but we'll find a way to do it, and I'm working with his office. So next week, 6:30 a.m., we're going to have Congressman Gaetz. We'll have Eric Gilmore and Janice. I'm going to try and get a professor of ethics to talk from the university. So if anyone has a beat on a professor, an ethics professor, I'd love to discuss some of that stuff with them. So next week, same time. Again, thanks to everyone for joining us. If I didn't get to your questions, by all means, please submit them. I develop a list of them every week, and then I try and get to as many as I can, because none of us, I'm an elected official. I'm not a medical professional. I have to lean on expertise like Mark Faulkner and the others from the hospitals and others. And I want to bring this to you every week so that you can ask questions and we can make the best decisions based on facts. And appreciate everyone being here. So have a great week, and we'll see you next Wednesday.